I've learned the hard way a few times that working with your friends and trying to employ your friends is a terrible, toxic idea that has gone about as badly as it could go for us. However, we still do it because without that, I'm not interested in any of this. We've had some successes and some failures. Some of the stuff, I have enough self-awareness to say that it was some of our fault, but often a lot of others' faults. And some of the stuff I can definitely also say was just 100% on us. So it's all failure, but you develop perspectives on it based on how severely you've had to deal with it and come through it. Sometimes if it walks like a duck, it's a duck. We've definitely failed. And yeah, I mean, you learn from them. Sometimes what you learn from them is you just made a bad choice. I don't start projects in order to be a boss. I don't start projects in order to hire strangers and help people that I don't care about. So while we've learned that lesson and failed in that regard, it's a lesson that we'll just continue to learn the hard way, because I just don't want to do it any other way.
We've had that as one of our slogans, learn the hard way, you know. We had a bike called The Hard Way, and I remember talking to Tag about something, and he was just like, well, you're gonna learn the hard way, and then like it stuck. That was how we figured shit out. Like, there were no mentors or, you know, guidance counselors or college classes or any of that kind of shit for, like, you know, having like some offbeat dream and chasing it. It was like, how are we gonna do this? And we're like, well, you're either gonna do it or you ain't. You're gonna learn it the hard way, like what works and what doesn't. And that became like one of our, you know, slogans, you know.
For me, failure isn't the end of the world. I think that people tend to fixate on failure and they don't always think about the path towards success. They see someone who's successful, or they see someone doing something that they wish they could be doing, and there's this sort of perception that, oh, that person's just gifted, or it just naturally happened that way. When in reality, most people go through failure all the time to get to where they are. I tend to embrace failure. I think failure is the best way to learn. For me, and I think other people who are going after big goals, they look for fuel in failure, because failure is it's a small piece of information that tells you what you did wrong, and it allows you to go back and retry what you just did and make a couple changes here and there and try again. BMX, skateboarding, all types, I mean, any kind of sport, but more often than not with BMX and skateboarding, you have that, you come face to face with that similar problem where you're trying that trick, you're trying to stick it, and you fail hundreds, thousands of times. And each time you're trying something different, whether it's repositioning your feet or readjusting your weight, how you're distributing your weight, finding that right balance point. You're necessarily going to be failing a lot of times until you find that sweet spot. That's something that I heard Rodney Mullen speak about quite a bit in his journey to becoming like a master flat ground skateboard rider, is that, you know, everything is about looking for the right set of parameters. Everything is a parameter. How you're standing on the skateboard, how you're positioning your handlebars on your bike, whatever it is. And as you're going for that trick, you have to move your body in a certain way, you have to reposition yourself, and all of these are little steps and little pieces of an ingredient that go towards making that trick. So I look at flatland very similar to how I approach 856, in the sense that I'm trying things that in my head I feel like are possible. I won't know until I try it. And again, more often than not, I'm gonna fail trying that trick or trying to edit a video in a certain way. And when it doesn't click, if I don't land that trick or if the video's just not looking right, I backtrack a little bit. I say, this is the point where I failed. Let me see what led up to this point, and let me try something else.
Sometimes when we are having some of our most difficult moments, like, I feel like that's when, you know, inspiration strikes. You know, that's when, you know, you start doing something that could be your next big thing.
Could also maybe be your next big failure.
It could, but again, I mean, you know, you never know what door that opens. And, you know, some of my more interesting stories in my life have been because of failure. To read the story where everything goes right, you know, like you need to be challenged. It's like, you know, you go to the gym and beat yourself up to get stronger, you know, like that's kind of what, you know, running an independent, like, small business is. You know, if you fail or if you deal with hardship, you learn from it. You know, and honestly, it's more interesting. I mean, some of the more interesting things that have happened to us, or we've gotten through, have been some of the things that we've had to overcome. So, you know, now when something happens or if there's an issue we have to deal with, considering I feel like I've dealt with most things already, you know, just roll up my sleeves and deal with it.
Failure. Yeah, just tell me about failure.
It's hard to think of yourself as engineered to endure something, but I feel like in some ways I have been. I came up on some pretty interesting and challenging situations when I was pretty young, and I'm not touting my life as some destitute youth with parents that didn't care in a society that hated me. But choosing unconventional paths early on made for some really bumpy roads in some pretty significant ways. And anytime any of that stuff went wrong, it taught you a lesson of loss that you won't forget, whether it was physical safety, psychological innocence, feeling like you let someone down so badly that you could never recover from that. I had digested all those pills at a very young age, and it's definitely made me, in both good and bad ways, who I am now. Something like like a business not going the way that we expected, or something like a work project not going the way it expected. A lot of those more tangible, harder things, and a lot of those more significant failures prepared me for all that stuff. All of it still hurts, and all of it's still challenging, but when you feel you've lost something so significant that you can never recover it, anything else is extremely relative. It kind of falls nicely into its place.
One of the first lessons I remember learning as a kid was falling off my bike. I didn't really think of it as a failure, it was more just like an obstacle. Failure would be like giving up, but like as BMXers, I think one of the first things we learned was resiliency, and like, you know, like until you give up, then I think that nothing really, like there's no such thing as failure, you know? You might have failed circumstances or failed relationships, or you know, things that didn't work out the way you want, but like there's always a lesson to be learned, and there's always like another opportunity to like kind of like regroup and try again. And like I think really failure is just when you stop trying. So many failures and such a big learning curve, like over and over and over again. Like anything from like manufacturing techniques to like understanding like tubing supply and tooling and, you know, production and all that shit, even just to like hiring your friends to work for you and having like employees and payroll and like just all these things that you don't think of when you're just daydreaming about wanting to do cool shit. You know, either learn the hard way or figure it out. And a lot of failures in this whole process of trying to develop sustainability with a small independent manufacturing business in America, when literally like every card in the deck is stacked against you, and like everything in our generation has been outsourced to different, you know, easier, cheaper, you know, bullshit scenarios. It's just like we're kind of doing it backwards this whole time. But I wouldn't have it any other way, you know?
I mean, we've grown, but it hasn't been, you know, all success. I mean, we've encountered all sorts of obstacles, all sorts of, you know, things that, you know, threaten the business, things that, you know, were difficult for us to overcome, whether it was, you know, key bands that we put a lot of resources into breaking up, you know, right before they were about to kind of hit it, or, you know, just the format changing. Right now, you know, we're kind of facing a reckoning where, you know, we started as a label. You know, Bridge 9 started before we had, I mean, there was no website. You know, it was like pretty much before most people had internet. All of our promotion was photocopied catalogs, you know, in the early days. And, you know, now everything is switching over to be more digital. I mean, you know, streaming represents 75% of all music sales, and we still have a huge warehouse for physical products that, you know, does well initially, but, you know, at some point you kind of have to, you know, lessen your footprint if you want to be more competitive. So that's what we've been doing now. We're focusing on kind of downsizing our warehouse, you know, making it so that, you know, we can be a bit more competitive.
when I decided to try doing 8x6 full time, the biggest fear I was hearing back from friends and family was, what if it fails? Like, what do you do? I was and still am pretty confident that, like, if this doesn't work, I can go back to what I was doing before. But when I stopped to think about that decision at the time, I was weighing a couple different things. I was primarily thinking about, if I don't do this, what kind of regret will I live with later on in life, looking back, being like, damn, I should have really tried that. So for me, when it came time to making that decision, I felt that I would rather try to do this and have it fail than to not try at all and then live with that regret later on in life. Everything that I do, I try to turn it into like an experiment. Like, I want to achieve this goal, let me try doing it with these steps. And more often than not, those steps fail. So it forces me to go back and reevaluate my assumptions and reevaluate what those steps were. And it gives me an opportunity to refine those steps and try something new and reattempt that goal. The biggest piece of advice I have for people who are trying to break out of whatever monotony or monotonous role that they're living in is to not be afraid of failure and to actually try risky things. And it's obviously natural to be upset about failure and to feel that sort of dejection with it, but it's important to, like, recover from that and try to reassess what caused that failure, and use that as, again, a way to restructure your approach.
In terms of having to actually think about what if I don't, and I think that's part of what lets us move forward so well here is that there is at this point any backup plan that I would want, but I have no use for one, and therefore I don't think about it. We've said before, we would rather fail than suck, and I continue to think that that's truer every day. And the finish of that statement is just the fact that we will never suck.
There have also been instances where, early on I would film a fight that broke out at a show, because at the time I was thinking, like, I'm documenting what's going on, a fight's breaking out, let me film it. Not realizing that that's very, short-sighted, because it puts the venue at risk, it puts people at risk, puts me at risk for having that. So I think I learned the hard way that it's important to, there's certain things that you shouldn't just document, and it's best to just put the camera down.